You're listening to the CyberWire Network, powered by N2K.
AI is making phishing attacks faster, more convincing, and harder for people to spot, and traditional security awareness and phishing training weren't designed for this level of attack. HawksHunt helps security teams prepare employees for the attacks they face every day with personalized phishing training that adapts to each employee and reduces risky behavior over time. For IT and security leaders looking to strengthen their human layer of defense without adding more manual work, visit hawkshunt.com/cyberwire to learn more. That's HOXHUNT.com/cyberwire. If you're heading to Black Hat USA this year, make plans to visit the SpecterOps Kennel Club. As creators of Bloodhound, the SpecterOps team will host talks with OpenAI and the UK AI Security Institute, as well as hands-on workshops aimed at helping you understand AI-accelerated attack paths and the latest in identity tradecraft. Visit specterops.io to pre-register and learn more. SpecterOps Kennel Club is adjacent to Libertine Social inside Mandalay Bay. While you're there, visit the N2K CyberWire podcast studio, where we'll be capturing expert perspectives and conversations from across Black Hat.
Energy independence is a huge problem for Europe right now. That's how people heat their homes in the winter. I mean, it's just like that's a very, kitchen table issue, whereas space feels very, very abstract. So I imagine it's a much harder sell. I don't have a solution here. If I did, I wouldn't be on a podcast. But
that's why I don't think we've seen any also major legislation on that front, right?
Yeah.
Because I think it's to the point. It's really easy to point out the problem. Kudos, clap on the back for me. Hey, that's something we need to fix. But
I'm sure no one in Europe thought of any of this, right? We're so smart.
I'm a truly original one of one here.
Welcome. I'm Maria Varmazis, and you're listening to T-Minus Space Cyber Briefing. In this show, we examine the evolution of cybersecurity and the global and orbital infrastructure that powers, protects, and connects our lives. Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining me today. We're picking up where we left off in last week's episode. Recapping a little bit, last week, T-Minus producer Ethan Cook and I kicked off a chat about space sovereignty in Europe, what it means and why the emphasis is on it now, and its parallels to data sovereignty. Lots of geopolitics, lots of current events. Definitely listen to last week's episode if you missed it. And this week is part 2. We're finishing up our European space sovereignty chat and looking at it today through 2 primary lenses. One is the global space supply chain, and the other is the influence that NATO has on this entire discussion. Yeah, so lots to get into. So let's dive into it with producer Ethan Cook, bringing us back in as we dive right in with space sovereignty and the supply chain.
There's another wrinkle to this that, probably doesn't get talked about as much, not in the sovereignty aspect of it, but more from a resiliency aspect of it, which is supply chain and where we're sourcing stuff from.
Yep.
We talk about, we need to have consistent access, not just to, fuel, but rare earth metals, semiconductor chips, et cetera. And these are all very important for just being able to run the infrastructure, et cetera. But the ability to produce these things on your own is critical. And I think that's something that the U.S. has been working really hard to get that sovereignty aspect. It's why we've seen so much investment in the chip industry within the U.S., because I think they realized in the COVID era that was something that we were not nearly as secure on as we wanted to be.
No, we are not. No. Yep.
But I think Europe is having to really grapple with this too, because unlike the U.S., they don't have the land to just prop up factories as much, as well as the, mining access to some of these rare earth metals that the U.S. has. While the U.S. does have to go international to a degree, they do have some of that within the country. And I think that is another wrinkle to the sovereignty question, which is, are you really sovereign if 80% of your rocket or 80% of your satellite isn't even sourced from your own country, right? Like, great, you can launch it, you can build it within your own country, but if everything comes from another country, what happens if a supply chain shortage happens? Or what happens if that country experiences a global conflict or a regime change or any of these things which could have dramatic impacts on a supply chain and overnight destroy it? That, to your point, a 1-year delay is it can be a death sentence to some of these
Yes.
programs. And
Yep.
that is another thing which I'm sure the conversation is happening because people would be foolish to not have it. I haven't seen as much legislation as I would have loved to seen, or movement to really start addressing some of these concerns, to speed up supply chains, to increase resiliency, and to minimize how much foreign dependence happens across the globe.
Yeah, I mean, that is such a fascinating point, Ethan. And I think drilling down into that a little bit, it becomes how much European space sovereignty is actually possible without going European colonialism 2.0,
Yep.
which I don't want to see. Just to be clear, I do not
I
want
don't
to see
think anyone
that.
does.
I don't think, no. Assuming Europe stays where it's at, how much sovereignty is achievable? Bits to atoms is sort of the phrase that I use. They're gonna have to be dependent on some international trade. So how much is enough sovereignty? It's like,
and how redundant is
75%
it? Like,
sovereign enough? Yeah.
Are they able to have multiple sources for rare earth metals, right? So that even though their primary source may be from country X, if that country has a problem, they have country Y as a backup, right? And maybe it's not as much, maybe the cost is not as efficient, but at least there is a consistent influx in.
Yeah, but it's expensive as heck.
Yes.
So then it becomes, how much is Europe willing to pay for all this? How much is the European taxpayer willing to front for all this? How much urgency does the average European taxpayer feel about funding this kind of thing, given everything else going on? I mean, unless Russia is literally knocking on the border, which some would say they are, depends on who you ask, and it depends on where you are physically located in Europe, I would also say.
Yes.
Having just been in the Baltics a few months ago, I was like, yeah, it really, really depends on who you ask. Do you need Russia literally in your country for this to become urgent, or can you prepare for this ahead of time? So how much autonomy is worth paying for? There's so many other parallel problems going on. Energy independence is a huge problem for Europe right now. That's how people heat their homes in the winter. I mean, it's just like that's a very, kitchen table issue, whereas space feels very, very abstract. So I imagine it's a much harder sell. I don't have a solution here. If I did, I wouldn't be on a podcast.
That's why I don't think we've seen any also major legislation on that front, right?
Yeah.
Because I think it's, to the point, it's really easy to point out the problem. Kudos, clap on the back for me. Hey, that's something we need to fix. But
I'm sure no one in Europe thought of any of this, right? We're so smart.
I'm a truly original one of one here. But it's a lot harder to not only build that base. The cynic in me wants to say that some of this we've missed the opportunity on. I think, to your point, the Ukraine invasion was a really good opportunity to galvanize, especially within Europe. And while there was some galvanization, I think you could argue that there was probably an opportunity for more. And that's the cynic in me saying that, the boat may have sailed on that opportunity and we may be waiting for another one, because while the Ukraine war is still very much going on, I think the fervor for it has dramatically reduced. I also think the U.S. has been very savvy, whether you like it or not, with its negotiation of rare earth metal deals to help out with that, and support that effort there. And I think that that was an opportunity for Europe to negotiate similar deals, right? And I think those are concerns long term that are not necessarily easily resolved and will require an immense amount of political capital to get resolved.
When we're talking about international collaboration, I mentioned that Russia was, prior to 2022, a key player and a key partner. I have been fascinated to see the emergence of India as a partner to European space program. Now, India, I in case people don't know, I would hope they do, massive player in space on its own.
Massive player in the world, in everything.
Yes, in everything. And they have an extremely mature space program, extremely successful. They have been the launch provider for many countries, actually, for their own sovereign space program. So if a country wants to have their own sovereign satellite for Earth observation or whatnot, they build the satellite. In a lot of cases, they will send it to India to launch it for them if they don't have a launch capability of their own. So India has been a huge player for a long time. And I've been just seeing over the journalist wire, essentially, so many press releases about Indian startups or established Indian space industry players increasingly going to events in Europe, collaborating with European players. To me, this is sort of like the underreported story because people just go, well, what's China doing? And it's like, well, that China's doing what China's doing. They're huge, obviously. India is also huge, and I think they are very well primed to be a key collaborator and partner to Europe if it is mutually agreeable to both parties.
Yeah, I mean, I think the India conversation is something that has flown under the radar for a long time now. I think the U.S. has been if you track U.S. investments and if you track U.S. international partnerships, India has been something that has been a quiet but very, very growing force within Southeast Asia and South Asia. As a U.S. partner. It is very clearly in response to China. I think the U.S. has recognized that China can't be stopped. It can't. It's for years we were banking on their economy collapsing. It didn't. For years we were hoping that we could maybe make out a friendly, trade agreements and all that. And while that can happen to a degree, it's not really going to stop them. The advancements that they're happening and the control that they're exerting over South Asia, East Asia, Southeast Asia is immense. And the Pacific as a whole, Indian Ocean as a whole is immense. And the U.S. doesn't have the presence there by itself to really stop that. And so the U.S. has pivoted over the past 2 decades, increasingly year over year, to look at India as a viable partner in this. And it's not a coincidence that Biden, Trump, and Obama have all been friends with Modi,
the prime ministers.
And their previous versions, right? Like there has been a ton of courting there, a ton of investment there from U.S. businesses, U.S. military, et cetera. And I think Europe is also realizing the same thing, that if they want to, and India has recognized that India's strength right now, at least in my opinion, is being able to not function as a competitor, but to European and U.S. nations, but as a complement, saying, hey, we're not trying to compete with you. We're trying to give you the tools that you can't have or don't want to invest in or whatever, and use them with here. We'll run your operations for you. We'll run support agreements for you, trade agreements, et cetera, manufacturing, whatever it may be. And in return, we'll make a ton of money off you. And in return, you don't have to invest that but more money into building out your own domestic. And it's a win-win on the geopolitical stage as well, because it's a hard counter to China. Having another regional superpower there that is growing very rapidly has actively made it harder for China to kind of really, the Belt and Road Initiative, for those who follow that, is still obviously going on, and it will be going on. There's nothing really stopping it, but it is not nearly as powerful as it could have been. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, truly. You ignore India at your own peril. And India has an extremely educated workforce, a very mature space program that's been extremely successful. And for everybody who's always watching costs, they've had these successful space missions at way lower cost than a lot of other space programs like in the United States. I'm always keeping an eye on deals that are happening between European and UK companies and organizations and the same in India, because there's a lot going on there and it's just fascinating to watch. On that note, let's take a short break now. When we come back, we'll switch topics from the global supply chain over to NATO and its impact on the space sovereignty conversation. Back in a few. You got me thinking about NATO just now, which I wasn't planning on talking about, because it's like, how much do we want to dive into this?
We can do a NATO conversation next time and expand that out.
I know. So when I was at the cyber headquarters in December, this is such a brag. I can't believe I get to say this. I'm just going to say, when I was at NATO cyber headquarters in Estonia, I remember my ears perking up because they said, by the way, we also established a space center of excellence in the last few years. And I remember thinking, well, that's very interesting. I should remember that. So NATO established their Space Center of Excellence in 2023. So NATO is a factor in this conversation.
It has to be.
It has to be. So I'm wondering how much of the space sovereignty discussion is either complicated or augmented by a conversation maybe being spurred by NATO. I'm wondering out loud.
No, I think it's a great question to ask. I think when you think of NATO traditionally, you think of this rock-solid alliance, and I think obviously over the past 10 years, that's been a little shaky. And this to the same thing of driving this sovereignty aspect. I think with the U.S. not only just willing to pull back in general, but also pull back on some of these core military agreements that have been rock solid for decades. And Europe has had our back when we went to war in again Iraq and Afghanistan, right?
Yes, they did. Yep.
That was these are rock solid agreements that have been there for a long time. And with the U.S. signaling that it is not willing to contribute as much, or its contributions will be with caveats added to them, I think you get to the conversation, and this is again driving that concern where Europe is saying we need to, and NATO is saying that while the U.S. we can still use them, they'll still be there, they'll still contribute. We need to make sure that in order for NATO's long-term security, that there has to be investment on the European front. To make sure that Europe has its standing, so that if the U.S. were to ever leave, or the U.S. decides it doesn't want to contribute as much, or whatever would happen, that doesn't leave the rest of the countries caught with their pants down. And I think, which kind of would have happened if it was 5 years ago.
Yeah. Oh man, I feel like we could have an entire NATO conversation.
Yeah.
I got such a NATO. If you haven't listened to the NATO podcast that I did about the cyber coalition, we'll put a link in the show notes, because I learned so much about what NATO's doing, and that was on the cybersecurity side.
When you talk about the various aspects of NATO, obviously you have the first parts are kind of outlining what it is, and then the later aspects, the various articles are outlining what the expectations are of the various countries. Article 5 is the most, to your point, the most well-known one, which is everyone has the right for mutual defense, where if one is invaded, we all fight back. And it was a core pillar of the Cold War, and why we had kind of this constant proxy war situation where no one ever really wanted to fight, because no one really wanted to kick off another global world war, but everyone wanted to have many proxy wars with people that weren't involved in the USSR and NATO.
I was interviewing someone who actually works at NATO, and she was saying Article 3 is that allies may separately and jointly, by means of continuous and effective self-help and mutual aid, maintain and develop their individual and collective capacity to resist an armed attack.
So they're saying that the interpretation of that would be for information sharing.
That was part of it. So the thing I had learned about on my NATO trip that surprised me was about Article 3. That's getting a lot of, I don't know if it's renewed emphasis, but that was the emphasis of some of the conversations I had with actual NATO staff. And it was, Article 3 is the idea around continuous and effective self-help and mutual aid.
Yeah.
And that can apply to things, not just like physical infrastructure, but also virtual infrastructure and cybersecurity, but also infrastructure for information sharing.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, the context of that conversation that I was having at that time was specifically around cybersecurity. I could easily see that also applying in the context of space.
I think it would be foolish for it not to. I think you have, information is power, knowledge is power, and especially, we see it with the Five Eyes to pull another military alliance.
Oh man, we're going everywhere.
That is a whole information sharing alliance. That's the whole point of it. And I think when you look at NATO, it's a similar aspect, which is the ability to respond to actual physical threats with collective firepower is what NATO is always known for. But the ability to prevent, the ability to circumvent, the ability to predict these events are just as important. And I think that's also a hidden strength of NATO, and it will, if it's not already, it will be, and I would be surprised if it isn't, be a core part of their space strategy, both from a cybersecurity perspective as well as just a traditional national security perspective, to securing space, to securing capabilities for the long term. I think that is an aspect which, to kind of tie it back to that sovereignty point, is critical, right? Europe being able to provide and share information within itself, within its member states, with the UK, across the EU, et cetera, is critical. And that is something that I think getting away from relying on other countries for intelligence, while that should be something to consider, and intelligence sharing should be obviously always prioritized, because the more data points you have, it's just better for so many reasons. But I think having the ability to say, we have our own strong intelligence capabilities, we have our own strong training capabilities, we have our own strong detection abilities, that is so important for Europe. And I think it's an underlying conversational point for this, is to really approach this both from a physical independence sovereignty question, from a data independence and sovereignty question, and from a intelligence national security sovereignty question.
All right, Ethan, yeah, we could probably talk about this for hours. Genuinely, I think you and I probably could.
It's my wheelhouse.
I know, and it is genuinely so fascinating to kind of get nerdy about this, because it's current events, it's space, it's international relations, it's all the stuff that I think you and I both really enjoy thinking and talking about. So I have a feeling we're going to have more follow-ups, especially as the Space Act continues to work its way through in legislation. So we're going to keep an eye on that. But in the meantime, Ethan, this has been so much fun.
Yes, I loved it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we'll do it again. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on.
And that's T-Minus Space Cyber Briefing, brought to you by N2K CyberWire. If you like what you heard today, you will also enjoy our newsletter, Signals and Space. You will get research and notes pulled together by our producer, Ethan Cook, and me, along with this week's top space cyber news stories. Subscribe by visiting thecyberwire.com/newsletters. As always, we would love to know what you think of our podcast. Your feedback ensures that we deliver the insights that keep you a step ahead in the rapidly changing cybersecurity landscape. If you like the show, please share a rating and review in your podcast app. Please also fill out the survey in the show notes or send an email to space@n2k.com. We're proud that N2K CyberWire is part of the daily routine of the most influential leaders and operators in the public and private sector, from the Fortune 500 to many of the world's preeminent intelligence and law enforcement agencies. N2K helps cybersecurity professionals grow, learn, and stay informed. As the nexus for discovery and connection, we bring you the people, the technology, and the ideas shaping the future of secure innovation. Learn how at n2k.com. Thank you again for listening to T-Minus. I am your host, Maria Varmazes, and the show is produced by Ethan Cook and Liz Stokes. We're mixed by Elliot Peltzman and Trey Hester, with original music by Elliot Peltzman. Our executive producer is Jennifer Iben, with content strategy by Mayan Plout. Peter Kilpie is our publisher. See you next week.
Heading to Black Hat USA, the N2K CyberWire team will be on-site recording from our podcast studio in the SpecterOps Kennel Club. If you're interested in joining us for a conversation or learning more about what we're recording throughout the week, stop by the studio and meet the N2K CyberWire team. SpecterOps' Kennel Club is adjacent to Libertine Social inside Mandalay Bay.